guys, and welcome to podcast number 7. This is Sarah with your ABA help, and I am here to give you guys a 25-question quiz on what we've been talking about from podcast 5 and 6. So part 1 and part 2 of task B. Now, we're not finished with task B, but we've covered a lot of the basic terms. Now, I wanted to give you kind of a good, rounded quiz to just study. Make sure you know these basic terms, practice your fluency, all that, get you going. This quiz will be really good for those foundation terms like positive, negative reinforcement, what's behavior, what's response, making sure you can pick out the difference in the questions. I try to make this as hard as I could. I'm just a BCBA. I passed the exam, but that doesn't make me an expert in this material, but I'm doing my best. I think you guys are going to enjoy this one. I will have the PDF version posted in my Patreon, so if you'd like to download it so you can take it in the future, take the paper version, feel free to. And then a quick little plug before we get started. I did want to let you know that if you are watching this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I have my YouTube channel, Your ABA Help. I'm going to make a video that is going to be talking about my salary, what I made in the first year, what I should have made in my first year, the benefits I got. If you're studying and getting ready to sit for your exam, I really want you guys to have the tools to be able to advocate for yourself, know how to research what you should be making, understand how you can figure out the salaries in your area, things like that, because I don't want you guys screwed over like I was. So we are going to talk about how to figure that out, what my experience is, my advice, my tips, tricks, all that fun stuff. Gonna be in that video. I'm going to literally show you guys screenshots from my W-2 so you can see the numbers. It's going to be really fun. I love sharing this kind of stuff. I think it is so crucial that we all talk about what we make in this field because there's so many companies out there, guys. They're greedy. They are money hungry, in it for the wrong reasons, or they've lost sight of the population that we serve. So let's talk about it so we can advocate for ourselves. But anyway, let's get into it. So I'm going to read the question and then I'm going to give you your 4 choices. I'm going to pause for a second, give you a chance to think about an answer. Once you answer it, I'm going to give my answer and I'm going to give a quick little explanation on why that one is the correct answer. I won't go too far into it. It's not going to be too long of a video. But if you guys would like more details, ask down in the comment section on YouTube and I can answer them for you. But I will give you kind of the nudge on why my answer is right. Solid. Alright, number 1. When I go camping, I get eaten up by all the mosquitoes. So I started applying bug spray to prevent this. Now, I no longer get eaten up by mosquitoes. What is this? Negative reinforcement, negative punishment, positive reinforcement. It is negative reinforcement. So for these kind of questions where we're talking about negative and positive reinforcement and all of those, you have to look at what is changing the behavior when you're adding something in. So like a classic example is the speeding ticket. So adding in a speeding ticket isn't changing the behavior. Giving somebody a piece of paper doesn't make somebody not want to speed less. That doesn't do anything. For a speeding ticket example, it's the money being removed from the bank account. You losing money is what is changing your behavior. Putting a piece of paper with a speeding ticket doesn't change its behavior. Taking the money away and having that punisher of a speeding ticket, that event happen, that's going to be changing your behavior. So same thing with this bug spray example. So spraying on the spray doesn't do anything. What is actually changing the behavior is that removal of being bit up and ate. So you gotta remember with negative reinforcement, that is an escape and avoidance contingency schedule, right? We know that the removal of the sunburn, the removal of the money from the bank account, the removal of the itch is gonna be what is actually gonna change the behavior. Does the behavior go up or go down? It says in here that I started applying bug spray every time and I'm no longer getting bitten up. I'm happy it's being reinforced. So negative reinforcement is the answer. Number 2. Sally was yelling at Johnny. Sally threatened to push Johnny for taking her toy. Johnny laughed and walked away with her toy. Johnny did not see Sally the rest of the afternoon. However, Johnny continued to take the toy from Sally when he saw her later that evening for 3 separate instances. Sally ran off and cried, telling the teacher, The teacher put Johnny in a separate area so Johnny could not take Sally's toys anymore. Why did Sally's threat not work? The teacher put Johnny in a separate space so we did not have enough information. She did not follow through by engaging in positive punishment. It did work because it got Johnny to stop using extinction. Sally did not threaten Johnny because he laughed, reinforcing his behavior. It's going to be she did not follow through by engaging in positive punishment. Remember, threats are not punishment. Threats in themselves, saying something that you're going to do something, is not a positive, negative, punish, or reinforcer, none of that jazz. A threat is just words. What is the behavior changing agent there is what actually happens. So in this case, Sally didn't do anything. Sally just threatened Johnny. She said, I'm going to push you down if you keep taking my stuff, dude. And she never did. So Johnny kept doing it. So she did not follow through because she didn't engage in adding her pushing to decrease Johnny's behaviors, that positive punishment. She needs to follow through in order to make her quote unquote threat real and working. Number 3, consequences only affect blank behavior. Present, past behavior, future, contingent. Yeah, consequences only affect future behavior. So we have our 3-term contingency, A, B, C. C is the consequences. So in order to have behavior change of the SRS Watson conditioning behaviorism, it's going to be those future behaviors. Number 4, scratching an itchy spot on your arm is the best example of what? Extinction, positive punishment, discriminative stimulus, automatic reinforcement. It is automatic reinforcement. So we have socially mediated and automatic reinforcement contingencies. Socially, you need another person. Automatic, you do yourself. So stimming, scratching, those things that you are reinforcing without another person being involved is going to be a automatically reinforced contingency. Number 5, escape and avoidance behaviors are typically exclusive to which of the following? Negative reinforcement, negative punishment, positive punishment, positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement. So this is just kind of one of those to know. The removal of an aversive thing increases your behavior. That's what negative reinforcement is all about. It's a good one to know for that exam for sure. Number 6, you should make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, Spotify, and or Apple Podcasts for more content like this and to support my efforts. True. All right. Next one is number 7. A blue flag, blue cup, blue dog, and a blue gum could all be grouped together in which stimulus classification? Temporal locus, formal dimensions, antecedent properties, stimulus control. This one is formal dimensions. So the formal stimulus class is going to be by weight, color, size, shape. These next 4 questions have the exact same paragraph. I went ahead and did the exact same chunk of information, a scenario you might see in clinic happen. And then I asked you different questions so we can really practice making sure we can break up these questions and answer the question and what it's asking and use the information that's in that text and really make sure we are listening to the question and answering it, not what we think the question's asking or what we think is going to happen in this scenario. Making sure we are very thorough with how we are looking at these questions is extremely important. So I'm going to read it, but just a heads up on those 4. They're going to be the exact same. We're going to go through them. A therapist and a child are playing together and having a blast. Both are giggling and interacting with each other. There's a red card and a blue card on the table. The child immediately touches the blue card before the therapist does anything. The therapist reinforces this with praise and tickles because he just knows the right answers and he is so smart. The child immediately starts to cry and runs from the therapist. The therapist is shocked by this incident and takes a day off after that. They come back the next day. They have the same child. The child immediately cries at the sight of them, and the therapist walks away. Which of the following answers best explains why the child immediately touched the blue card? They are super smart. They find the therapist reinforcing, negative reinforcement, or the history of reinforcement. It is history of reinforcement. So in this question, I didn't try too hard to trick you. Just know when you start to see those best or the most correct, you're looking at all of those and you're starting to cross ones out that don't even apply, or they're close but not really. When you start to get to those like two that are like could be right, now you're starting to pick the best one. The little tip on that is just to start to use those questions, those context clues. I'll try to trip you up a little bit later. Just be ready for that. Right, and then I'm just going to insert it in here, me rereading it again, and I'm going to give you that new question. A therapist and a child are playing together and having a blast. Both are giggling and interacting with each other. There's a red card and a blue card on the table. The child immediately touches the blue card before the therapist says anything. The therapist reinforces this with praise and tickles because he just knows the right answers and he is so smart. The child immediately starts to cry and runs from the therapist. The therapist is shocked by this incident and takes a day off after that. They come back the next day. They have the same child. The child immediately cries at the sight of them, and the therapist walks away. Which one is the best answer for why the child cried from the tickles and praise? The tickles and praise are aversive. The tickles and praise scared them. The tickles have a history of reinforcement. The child's history of punishment resulted in the behavior. The tickles and praise are aversive. So the only reason we can answer this and know that it is aversive is because we have the information on the next day. The next day, the child is still scared of that adult. So that child has paired the tickles and the praise with that adult, and they're scared. It's aversive. They did not like it. They didn't like it. They paired it. They didn't have positive reaction. So we can use our data and our information. Obviously, in the best case scenario, we'd want to have multiple days of data on this, but when we start to come into aversive reactions, we don't want to push it. We don't want to put this child in a situation where they're having anxiety and they are experiencing the aversive thing more than they ever need to. So for me, if I were BCBA and I saw this interaction, I'd be like, okay, wait a second, we've got something going on here. Something has been paired wrong. There's been an interaction that we need to work on. And in this case, it's that the therapist gave those tickles and that praise, and that kid did not like it. So he's paired that therapist negatively, and now we've got a problem. A therapist and a child are playing together and having a blast. Both are giggling and interacting with each other. There's a red card and a blue card on the table. The child immediately touches the blue card before the therapist says anything. The therapist reinforces this with praise and tickles because he just knows the right answers and he is so smart. The child immediately starts to cry and runs from the therapist. The therapist is shocked by this incident and takes a day off after that. They come back the next day. They have the same child. The child immediately cries at the sight of them, and the therapist walks away. What did the therapist do to the child's card-touching behavior? They positively reinforced it. They negatively punished the response class of touching the card. They positively punished the behavior from occurring. They put the card-touching behavior on extinction. The answer is they positively punished the behavior from occurring. The therapist added in their tickles and their praise, decreasing this behavior. It kind of had that adverse reaction of what we would want. We want it to be positively reinforced. We add in the praise and the behavior increases, but that's not what happened. We added in the praise and tickles, behavior decreased. So knowing that, we would make some adjustments and have the therapist, interact differently. Maybe we do a preference assessment, be more careful with our choices and our volume, and move forward in a different way and reassess that skill. A therapist and a child are playing together and having a blast. Both are giggling and interacting with each other. There's a red card and a blue card on the table. The child immediately touches the blue card before the therapist does anything. The therapist reinforces this with praise and tickles because he just knows the right answers and he is so smart. The child immediately starts to cry and runs from the therapist. The therapist is shocked by this incident and takes the day off after that. They come back the next day. They have the same child. The child immediately cries at the sight of them, and the therapist walks away. How is the therapist likely paired with the child now? The child will move on because of the learning history. The therapist is put into the temporal loci class. The therapist is likely a consequence now. The therapist is likely aversive. If the answer is the therapist is likely aversive, but we can tell based off our data, if we took ABC data, we can kind of look at it and see something's going on here. Number 12, which of the following is the best definition of response class? Various ways we manipulate the antecedent stimuli to result in a single response. A group of consequences that are reinforced by the function of one's behavior. A group of responses that serve the same function for one behavior. A variation in the functions of our behavior that result in one behavior outcome. The answer is a group of responses that serve the same function for one behavior. So what I found when I was taking my test in the mock exam is these questions where they start to intertwine the words and it sounds so complicated get really hard. It's really hard to sift through these questions because there's multiple things going on in each of these sentences and they're really hard to break up. My recommendation for those type of situations where you're just like, I have no idea what I just read, is to start with that first question and just take it segment by segment. So for this example, so our first one is various ways we manipulate the antecedent stimuli to result in a single response. That's why I've worked so hard on these podcasts to give you guys the key words and make sure you have that foundation knowledge. Because if you know what an antecedent stimuli is, you can start to break up this question and see how, those keywords interact with those other keywords, and you can start to make sense of these, hopefully. So we know what antecedent stimuli is, we know what a single response is, so we can start to break up this question. The same thing, a group of consequences that are reinforced by the function of one's behavior. So we know what consequences are. A group of consequences, we can understand what that is. We can understand that something is being reinforced by the function of one's behavior. If you kind of get what I'm talking about, you start to break those up. Don't get so overwhelmed. Take it question by question, response by response. You got this. Number 13, which of the following is not an example of behavior? Being quiet, tapping your foot, looking around the room, hitting. The answer is being quiet. A dead man can be quiet. Hitting, you might be thinking, that one's not a behavior. It's just not operationally defined. It's not how we'd want to do an ABA, but it's definitely behavior. A dead man cannot hit you. Thank God. Number 14, which answer is most true about extinction? So we got one of those most true questions, guys. Good luck. First one is behaviors that have been punished over time cannot be put on extinction because they are not learned behaviors. Behaviors that are resistant to extinction are ones that have short histories of reinforcement. Behaviors typically increase in intensity before decreasing due to a person trying to access what has been previously reinforced. Extinction is the same thing as punishment procedures. The answer is behaviors typically increase in intensity before decreasing due to the person trying to access what has been previously reinforced. So with these most true questions, typically I find on mock exams, I don't remember for the exam and I can't tell you what's on the exam, but for the mock exams, I remember it would just be one word or one tiny concept was off. something about that was just not quite right. Like, it's really close, but just something's not quite right. And that's where you really got to know your stuff to be able to pick out that one little thing and be like, yep, there it is. That's the thing. So, an example in this question is behaviors that are resistant to extinction are ones that have short histories of reinforcement. I just changed that word long histories of reinforcement to short. So it's just a one word difference, because if I would have the long histories of reinforcement, so being able to really pick those out, and that's what makes those most true questions so tricky, is you gotta know your stuff, and it's hard. Number 15. Every morning when you get to work, your coworker starts jabbering away. You are tired and cannot stand it. So you think to yourself that you'll start arriving late to work to avoid this person. The coworker is a blank to your arriving on time to work behavior. Negative reinforcer, punisher, reinforcer. We do not have enough information. The answer is we do not have enough information. We do not have enough information is the answer for this one, because me saying that I'm going to quit smoking, or I'm not going to come to work, or I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do that, is just talk. If we don't have the history and the data to support that talk, we don't know whether it's positive, negative, any of that. You guys have got that. I've said it a million times at the point, you got this. But when you start taking these mock exams, real exams, don't let that trip you up. After you selected a couple questions that's like, we don't have enough data, you're gonna be like, there's no way. There's no way that is this. But there's not enough data, not enough data. Period. Question number 16. Bob has an open hand and is making contact with another person's open hand. All 5 fingers are extended outward, making the hand flat. How am I describing this high five? Using function, using topography, using stimulus class, using response class. The answer is using topography. Topography is explaining things how I see it, point blank. I'm just telling you how I see it. I'm not telling you why he's doing it, what exactly he's doing. I'm telling you exactly what I see. Topography, you're going to see in those operational definitions where we're explaining literally what we visually see. Question number 17. Little Johnny is able to grab a bowl from the counter, grab milk, twist open the milk jug lid, pour the milk, hold a spoon, scoop cereal, etc. Which of the following terms would best describe these behaviors? Responses, stimulus class, response class, repertoire. The answer is repertoire. I think this question's pretty tricky. I mean, it might not be for you, but for me, when I was making it, I felt like there's multiple answers that you could say are right. So, like, we know stimulus class, not right. Like, it has nothing to do with the size or intensity of preparing those antecedent stimuli. Like, there's nothing going on there with stimulus class. So, like, responses could be right, but it's not the best answer. So, like, responses they're usually going to be like an outline of the antecedent, so you can see the ABC, what are they responding to. So, like, if somebody said, little Johnny, make some cereal, and then it talked about this, I could see that being response. For this one, I would say it's going to be repertoire, because these are all his skills that he can do relevant to a particular setting, event, larger skill set. These are all his little behaviors and skills that he has. It's not response class, because response class is kind of those variations, those tiny variations, the way you do one behavior. So if we were talking about the way little Johnny pours the cereal and how he pours it differently every time, sometimes he holds the box in his left hand, sometimes he holds it in his right hand, that would be a little bit more response class. Question number 18, a single object is a blank. Stimulus, stimuli, response, environment. A single object is a stimulus. Number 19, which of the following statements is most correct? A response is a series of behaviors following the consequences and has a strong history of reinforcement. Extinction is the most important behavioral intervention tool because it allows the socially mediated contingencies to occur. Antecedents refer to the environmental conditions or stimulus changes that occur prior to the behavior. Reflexes are essential to the understanding of the three-term contingency. The answer is antecedents refer to the environmental conditions or stimulus changes that occur prior to the behavior. So again, this one you've got to be really careful and listen. There's just like one word differences, and there's some that are like pretty correct, but not the most correct. Tricky stuff, right? Like, for example, extinction is the most important behavioral intervention tool. Like, it's really important, but we don't know if it's the most. Like, I would argue that like reinforcement might be the most, but even then, I would say that's the most correct. Like, it's not completely wrong, but it's not the most correct. The antecedent one is literally the definition of antecedent, and that one's the most correct. Are these fun, guys? Question number 20. The baby signed more when they are wanting more French fries. The caregiver gives them more French fries. What is the relationship of the caregiver to the baby's manding? Automatically mediated behavior, socially mediated behavior, negatively reinforced, reinforcement. The correct answer is socially mediated behavior. So for this one, you might have thought reinforcement because the caregiver is reinforcing the baby's manding of more, but remember, we don't have the data. We don't know if the baby is manned more again, because who knows? Maybe the French fries are actually punisher. Kids don't know what they want sometimes. Maybe they made the wrong sign and they got more French fries in the future. They're not going to man more because they don't want more. They need to learn all done. We don't have the data. We don't know. So it cannot be that one. But we do know that it could be social media because it is involving two people, is reinforcing that manding, that caregiver, socially mediated manding, socially mediated contingency. Solid. Number 21, consequences always exemplifies punishment occurring. True, because consequences are negatively paired contingencies. False, because consequences are just what occurred after the behavior. False, because punishment requires a consequence to be positively reinforced. True, because you cannot have consequences without punishment. The answer is false, because consequences are just what occur after the behavior. I included this one because I want to really drive home the fact that consequences is just what happens after behavior. Punishment is part of, the contingencies of reinforcement or the lack of reinforcement. Two separate things. Consequences are not bad. Punishment necessarily isn't bad either. It's just a decrease in behavior. Question number 22. We can predict what will be a reinforcer or a punisher based on how much we know about the person. This is an accurate statement. That statement is slightly inaccurate because we can only predict reinforcers. We do not know what will be punishing for a person. That statement is slightly inaccurate because we can only predict punishers. We know what is typically aversive to others. That statement is inaccurate because we cannot predict what will act as a punisher or reinforcer for a person. The answer is that statement is inaccurate because we cannot predict what will act as a punisher or a reinforcer for a person. Like I talked about in podcast number 6, this one is a huge pet peeve of mine. You cannot predict or guess what is going to be a reinforcer for a person. What I find reinforcing might be different from you. We have to do preference assessments. We have to look at our data. We have to ask the person. We have to judge based on their body language, how they react, how their behavior changes over time. All that. Can't guess. Question number 23. Temporal means what? Time. Temporary. A type of stimulus class. A type of response class. The answer is time. Temporal equals time. So anytime you see temporal in front of a term, it's talking about that term being described in time. Question number 24. Which of the following is not true about consequences? Consequences only affect future behaviors. Consequences select response classes, not individual responses. Consequences do not have the greatest effect on behavior when immediate. Consequences select only the behavior it precedes. Yep, the answer for this one is consequences do not have the greatest effect on behavior when immediate. For those questions that are which one is not, I always recommend switching it and doing which ones are, which one is. So that way you can do the correct ones and you can use the process of elimination. So if you can figure out which 2 to 3 answers are, you know those ones are not going to be the answer because you're looking for the one that stands out, the one that is not. So personally, I do a lot better if I flip it, especially if they start getting those nots or, without this or without that in those questions, your brain's going to get really confused. So if you switch it, so which of the following is true about consequences, you can pick out, okay, I know this one's true, I know this one's true, and that one's true. Because that's how we study. We don't study by looking at the negatives, we study by looking at positive, like this term is that, and that term does apply to that. So it helps your brain being able to pull out the information. For this one, consequences do not have the greatest effect on behavior when immediate. It's again just a word is switched. So consequences do have the greatest effect when they are immediate. So when consequences are directly after that behavior, you're gonna have the greatest effect. You want less than a few seconds after that behavior for that consequence to occur. So if you're using reinforcement intentionally, you want that reinforcement to occur very quickly after that behavior for the greatest effect. Question number 25. The term blank is often used to refer to stimulus conditions whose termination functions as reinforcement. Negative punishment, punished versus stimulus, secondary punishment. The answer is aversive stimulus. For these ones, I'm sure you guys already do it. You're just going to have to fill in that blank with those terms and see if they sound right, if they sound off, cross them out if it's not right, and then just keep replacing into that blank and being like, is this correct? So when we read it back, the term aversive stimulus is often used to refer to stimulus conditions whose termination functions as reinforcement. We're talking about what? Do you remember, guys? Negative reinforcement. Yeah, so we're talking about taking away that aversive something to increase the behavior. It's another way to talk about it. All right, and then I got question number 26 because one of those questions in there was a silly one. So question number 26. Topography has little to no use in understanding or identifying the behavior's function. True, because topography is just describing the antecedent conditions. True, because topography is just describing the way something looks. False, because topography is a first step to identifying the function of the 4 functions. False, because we must understand the topography of a behavior to understand the consequence contingencies. The answer is true, because topography is just describing the way something looks. For these type of questions, I recommend first figuring out, okay, is that statement true? Is it false? And then look at the reasoning, because those reasonings are going to start tripping you up because you're going to start guessing yourself. So just like, is this true? Is this false? So when I read topography has little to no use in understanding or identifying the behavior's function, I know that's true. I know that is a true statement. And then you're going to use the supporting statement. So it's true because topography isn't a function-based intervention. We know that. You've got to use your concept skills. It's not going to be a very easy fill-in-the-blank kind of question. These are typically broad. These ones are typically testing your knowledge and being able to pull in that best answers type of skill set. Questions. I hope you did well. If not, I hope you feel like you learned something. I hope this was beneficial as well. I am really enjoying making these quizzes. I find that they are a good way to sneak studying in, because even if you get them all right and it really helps you build that confidence and helps you know, I got this, I'm learning, I'm memorizing these terms. And the more you hear these questions, and the more you're able to pick out these answers and understand them and get more right, the better off you're going to be. And if you guys are able to listen to these while you're driving and answer them correctly, I am so impressed. I would not be able to do it. I don't know how you guys do it. You guys are really enjoying and watching these, which I appreciate, but I don't know how you guys do it. So you're superhuman. You're studying. You're getting it in. You're going to do great. You're going to pass. And those of you who are studying and are using these materials as part of your studying, once you get to that point where you sit for the exam and you pass, you guys have to comment and let me know so I can cheer you on. The easiest place to comment would be on the YouTube channel. Eventually, I'm going to get social media going. All right, I will talk to you guys next week. Thank you. I'll talk to you guys next week. Bye.